A good morning and a good evening to everybody who has taken out time to be with us today. Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank you, Mr. Ronen, on behalf of India Mentor for being kind enough and take out time from his busy schedule. Ronen happens to be a very senior consultant and application and data architect, and he has a tremendous experience running into more than 15 years into different programming languages and technologies. And it does not end there. He has a lot of experience in managing large development teams, leading them on all the aspects. And he has worked with a lot of different software companies on enterprise solutions at the SQL and BI level. And that being his one of the fortes, being a data architect. Apart from it, he is a very active community member. Ronan happens to be active in a lot of communities in the field of programming, SQL, and he also happens to be a moderator at MSDN. And there are a lot of TechNet communities, TechNet Wiki communities, that many of you would be aware of. He happens to be, leader with one of them as well. And if you do want to find out what Ronen has been up to, you can go read his technical blogs. He writes them, and he writes them very well. I've read a few of those myself. And there are plenty of TechNet articles and blogs where you can find a lot of technical articles from Ronen. And not the least, he also happens to be a Microsoft MVP, and therefore he is a very strong community member who is looking forward to help all of us. So thank you, Ron. Thank you so much for being us today. And thank you to everybody else as well. Ronen, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Manish. Let's start.
Sure.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to the meeting. Please make sure that you can see my screen, hear my voice, and see my camera. My name is Ronen Ariely. I'm from Israel, but most of my clients are abroad, including India. I'm a senior consultant in the field of data platform and application architecture. I basically provide consulting services, supporting and project management. You can Google my name if you want more information. It's very simple. The presentation, including the code, are available online. I will post a link after the meeting on my Facebook page. Okay, today we are celebrating the release of SQL Server 2017, and for this, before we start, I want to wear my celebration hat. And now we can start. Let's start our celebration. Well, SQL Server 2017 was released several days ago, and in my opinion, the main feature is that SQL Server is not limited only to Windows operating system anymore. This approach is not related only to SQL Server. In fact, for several years now, we can gradually notice that Microsoft developed their main applications as an open source and or for other platforms. Right now it's still okay, everything okay?
Yes, everything is okay, perfect. There's no freeze, nothing.
Great.
Being recorded well. Thank you. Please carry on. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, that's okay. We can go back very fast just for the recording. So I start to say who am I, and to mention that we are celebrating today the release of SQL Server 2017. It was released several days ago. Oh, and for the recording, I brought this to the party. Here, this is again. It's very important. It's part of the lecture. And we can continue to the agenda. We stopped here. Okay, so in this session, we do not focus only on SQL Server. In the next 60 minutes or so, I will review most of the applications which we usually use in our daily work on Windows. But in this meeting, I will show their equivalent in the Linux operating system. Instead of simply presenting a list of applications, I decided to prepare a development environment by actually installing all those applications one by one. Starting from scratch, let's prepare a new Linux virtual machine. Let me open Azure. We go to virtual machine, add a new all those virtual machine I will use today. Add a new virtual machine. For the sake of the lecture, and in general, I'm using Ubuntu. We did a lot of testing and we found out that Ubuntu gives the best performance. So I will use Ubuntu and I will use this version 16 and not the new one 17. The reason it's simply because several of the applications which I'm going to show you today are still in preview or very new and they are not supported in the new version of Ubuntu. So this will be something that we must do at this time. Now, creating a virtual machine can take about 5 to 20 minutes. And I don't want to waste our time waiting. Moreover, during the meeting, I hope to install several applications. And several of the installations can take more than an hour each. How can we do it all in 1 hour? Let me go back to the presentation. And I want to wear my cooking hat. Okay, and now, are you familiar with TV cooking shows? During cooking shows, you always see the chef prepare a mixture for the cake. He put it into the oven and they tell us to wait 20 minutes. But at this point, he immediately opened the oven again and he takes out a cake which he prepared in advance. I'm going to use the same trick in this lecture. For the sake of the presentation, I prepared in advance 11 virtual machines in different states of the procedure, and I will use them as needed. By the way, this is the cake that I will probably get if I will try to cook. I hope that you like my cooking hat. I feel so foolish wearing it. So let me take it off and I will go back to the celebration hat, which look a bit better. Okay, we created a new virtual machine in the Azure portal. I just want to remind you to open the ports in the Azure Network Security group. Port 22 is opened by default when you create Linux virtual machine. In addition, I opened port 3389 for a remote connection and port 1433 for SQL Server. At this time, we have a clean production server without any desktop environment. The goal is to build a user-friendly environment. This means that we are going to reduce server performance and create home user machine. Let's move to the demo. The first application which I want to mention is Winscp. Winscp is a file management client for Windows. We can use it in order to transfer files to the remote machine for installation. So this is my new installation. Log in. As you can see, our users folder is almost empty. Once we will install the desktop environment, this will be changed. The main application which we are going to use in order to manage our remote machine is named Putty. Let me connect. Great. Putty is SSH command shell client for Windows. We are going to use this application to prepare the desktop environment. Let's connect to our virtual machine here, and we will start the installation. Since we want to connect the virtual machine using Windows Remote Desktop instead of this command shell, my first action is to install a remote desktop server named XRDP. Now, the installation can take a while. So, what we are going to do, we will move to our next machine. There are thousands of desktop environments which we can choose from. The desktop environment is a package of applications which fit for different needs. It is important to mention that not all desktop environments support the use of XRDP. For this demonstration, I choose a very friendly package. We will install it right now. 1 second. Here. This package includes all the home application which you might need. The installation usually takes over an hour, so we will move to the next virtual machine right after this installation ended. We need to configure our XRDP to use this specific desktop environment. This is very simple and very fast. In order to do this, we need to change this file as well. We simply need to add the name of the desktop environment which we want to use whenever XRDP starts. Great. That's it. We can now connect to our virtual machine using Windows Remote Desktop. Let's connect to the virtual machine for the first time. So we have this. This alert we will see only in the first time that we connect to the desktop. I will choose the default option at this time, and this will add our panels. We can go over the applications which installed by default with this specific environment. You can see that we have a lot of application from Office, full open Office. We have everything that we need for the internet to continue the installation. And we even have games, which is very important if you install this at your work environment. You can play when the boss is not looking. I feel that I must stop at this point and explain again that this session is about creating a learning environment which fit for Windows user. You should never use this configuration in production. I highly recommended not to use XRDP application in production. Let me go back to the presentation for a second. We have done all this, and I want to stop here. If you do need to connect to your Linux machine, I mean the production remotely, then I highly recommend it to use VNC server, and I use this client Tight VNC. I use it for about 10 years, both on Linux and Unix. This is a very stable application. Before going back to the demo, do we have any question? Manish? Manish, are you here? I hope that you can hear me. Garov? Let me, 1 second. I don't hear Manish. I hope that he is online and that everyone can hear me.
Yes, definitely we can hear you.
Okay. I used this time to replace the battery in the mouse. Everything happened during the meeting. It's always like this. Let's go back to the demo. Since I'm lazy, I don't want to type each command. I will use a simple cheat sheet which I create in advance. I add it in my website. So let's go to the new virtual machine which we created, and I will open our browser. I see the browser take time. Okay. I will go to my website and I will use something that I prepare in advance. Until it's loading, I can mention that if you did choose to work with the new Ubuntu 17, for example, then you could use a simple copy paste from the host to the virtual machine. But in this version of Ubuntu, this is not supported. Therefore, I created this page, and I will simply copy and paste the command from here. back?
Ronen, yes, yes, yes. I think you're back now. Something moved, some wire moved correctly. Can you
Okay,
please say? Oh,
what
yeah,
did
we can hear you now.
Wagner, can you hear me? I said that you hear Manish, but can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear now. At least I can hear you back now.
Okay,
Yes,
when did you
something
lost
moved.
me? Did you saw the installation of the Visual Studio? You heard me speaking about the bug? I will go over it in theory very fast. Okay, so what I did, I created this page in my website just temporarily as a cheat sheet to use in the meeting. I connected to my website to this page, so I will be able to simply use copy paste instead of typing each command. The first application which we wanted to use is Visual Studio. I download it and then we execute those two lines. I see that audio is back. Great. According to the documentation, only those two lines are mentioned and it should work. After we finish to install Visual Studio, you will see it here under development, but it will not work. This is a bug. If you will try to click it, it will not work. The solution is to execute this line, this command, which is not documented. And this bug is reported to Microsoft for several months, but yet the document does not mention it. Next, I mentioned that you can install .NET as well if you need. For the sake of this lecture, I choose to skip this one, but you have here the procedure is basically the same. And we stop at this point, PowerShell. Okay, everyone hear me, I suppose, and I will continue. There are a lot of DBAs and developers that base their daily work on PowerShell. So this is the next application which we must install. We need to download it again from here, and we need to execute those two lines in order to install it. Since we lost some times, so let me skip it and I will go over to the next virtual machine, which this is already installed. So I will simply leave this virtual machine. And let's go to number 4. Okay, we installed the PowerShell and Visual Studio. We can see the Visual Studio and PowerShell is installed. We can start it. I hope I choose the right machine. Okay. After you install the PowerShell, you need to open a new shell. So it will all the configuration will be registered, and then you can start it. At this point, we are using PowerShell exactly like we are using in Windows. You can believe me that I am using PowerShell, and if you don't, here I will use a simple PowerShell command, and you can see that this is working well. It's time to install SQL Server. We have the preparation, PowerShell, Visual Studio. Let's go back to our page. and we are here. Let's start SQL Server. Okay, we'll use this terminal. First, we need to import the keys, and now we can register the application. And now we can start the installation. Once we start the installation, this can take very long time, so I will move to the next machine. This is actually the installation of a SQL Server, and we will let it run. It can take some times. We will simply move to the next machine. Great. Once SQL Server finished installation, we will get this alert. We need to configure our installation, so we need to execute this command. And you need to choose which of the license we are using. I will choose number 2, developer. I confirm. And I need a password. At this point, once we finish the configuration, we can start working with SQL Server. We can connect to the SQL Server remotely using SQL Server Management Studio, for example. We don't have any internal application to work with SQL Server. So I want to manage SQL Server locally. I will install SQL Server command tool, same tool that we are using on Windows. The procedure is very simple, and you can see it here. Same as installing the SQL Server, I need to execute the first 2 lines, then I start the installation. Once the installation finish, I just configure those lines in order to be able to work with the commands shell using the terminal shell. And it is installed, and we can simply use now SQL command. Of course, I didn't write anything. SQL command minus s local host minus user SA and the password. That's it. At this point, we can simply execute any query that we want. Manish, can you please choose a number between 1 to 10?
Okay, I'll have 8.
8. Okay. I just wanted that you will see that I actually create this new database right now. So create database, and the name will be yes, this work, and we will put 8. You said 8. Go.
Nice.
It will take several minutes, like any local installation, and we can now connect to the same server using SSMS and proof that we actually created this new virtual machine, new database, and everything is working okay. So here I already connected, but I don't have any database. We will refresh. And voila, this is managed databases. Managing the server with a, again?
So, I'm sorry, I just said perfect.
Yeah, this is your database. It must be perfect. Managing the server with a remote SSMS is probably the right way we should do in production. But in this meeting, we want to create a full development environment, which means we need to manage the server locally. Using SQL command tool, as I have just done, is one option, but we need a local database management studio, something with a GUI as well. Now, unfortunately, I am not authorized to expose what the future holds for us regarding this point, for example, since I signed a confidential agreement with Microsoft. But I do want to give you an alternative, a great alternative. The next application which I want to use is fully Database Management Studio, which I really love, and I use it for several years now. There are two main advantages in this application. First, like all the applications that I show you today, this application is supported in any operating system. The second point is that we can use it without the need to install it, which means that I store it in my disk on key, so I can use it whenever I need, wherever I need. Let's install it very fast. What is the time? Okay. So we go back to our machine. Here one, exit. And we want to get this. In order to use this application, we need Java. It's based on Java. And we already have Java installed by default. I just need to know which version we have. It's not installed yet. It registers. So let me check it. Okay, so the next step will be using the latest version that we have. Let's execute this command, and I will use the version that I found. In the meantime, let's download the application. What I did now, it's only installing Java. Now let's download the Database Management Studio. We will go to the end. Where do we have it? Here. I want a version without installing, simply a zip file. I will use this Linux 64 zip file. Save it. Okay. Let's see the installation. It still continue. This is the Java installation. The download is ready. This is our application. And in order to use it, we simply need to unzip this file. So let's unzip it. Extract here. That's it. This is the application. We need the Java to be installed first before we execute it. So let's see if it's finished. Great. And theoretically, at this point, we can simply execute our application. Okay, we need to connect to our server. As you can see, this application fit not only to SQL Server, you can use it for other database as well. We need to find SQL Server in the list. It should be MS SQL Server. We need to download the driver and connect to our server. SA, password, test connection. Great. Next, next, and finish. We are connected to SQL Server. As you can see, we can see manage database here. Everything works as expected. We can write queries. We can do everything that we need as DBAs. So at this point, we can continue. Manish, do we have any question at this point before we continue?
I don't have any questions as of now, and I don't see anybody else asking. I think pretty much everybody is engrossed in, understanding that everything is, looking simple. You are making it look simple. I'm just,
This is the idea.
I'm just trying to,
Eh,
digest it all very honestly.
Great. The idea of the lecture, as I mentioned in the preview, was to have a Linux machine with all the application for Windows users, so I must make it simpler. Okay, so we have everything working okay. Next, we can install some more features. First of all, installing the SSIS. Yes, SSIS is perfectly supported in Linux, and what is great about it is that you can actually create package on Windows and then you can take it to Linux and vice versa. It's the same package. The installation, it's the same procedure. I don't want to repeat myself, so we can just see. First line is simply to import the key. Second line, we register the application, and then we start the installation with those two lines. After the installation finish, exactly like installing SQL Server, we will need to set up the SSIS, so we will need to execute this line, and next we can use SSIS like in Windows. This is example of command that use SSIS. Once we finish with SSIS, the next feature we can install, and I like it a lot, it's a full text search. At this time we don't need anything but simply installed it using those two lines. And the last one that I want to install right now, or talk about it, it's the SQL Server Agent. SQL Server Agent is supported and very simple to install. You only need to execute the same basically two lines, and then you do need to restart the server. You will get an alert about this. You restart the server and we can move to our final machine to see everything work together. So let's close this machine. And we can go to number 8. Okay, let's see what we have here. This is a perfect, a full installed virtual machine. We have the application built in, including the Visual Studio. The browser we will need all the time. We have the Database Management Studio, a third party at this time. We have, of course, the Visual Studio, and we have the PowerShell, which we can execute on any terminal. Only we need to use PowerShell, and we can work with it just like with Windows. And since we don't have time, let's open our final machine with Windows. I want to show you to compare our final Ubuntu virtual machine, this one, with my Windows virtual machine. So let me bring my Windows virtual machine. One second. Remember what we have here, and let's move to the Windows virtual machine. Okay, I think it's look very familiar. We have all the application that we had in the Ubuntu. You can see that we have the start with the application. We have the same Firefox. We have our database management. What more we have here? Of course, we have the same Visual Studio. All the applications that we used are supported on any operating system. This is the basic idea of the lecture. And we have, of course, PowerShell. The only difference is that it's look differently. But did anyone notice my cheat? This Windows virtual machine is actually Ubuntu disguised as Windows. With some final touch, I gave it a look and feel like Windows. I must remind you that you should never use Microsoft background in your production Ubuntu. As I did here, it's not production. This was done only for the sake of the lecture, only temporarily. But this is Ubuntu, which is exactly familiar to Windows user, and you can start using it. So we can go back to our presentation. Let me just close everything. Great. Okay, we have done all this. We installed all the applications. And since there are no questions, we can continue. Unless there are questions, feel free. I will stop for this. I suppose that everyone know that there are third-party monitoring tools available, but those are very expensive. Microsoft Team also need a tool to monitor their application, especially when they develop a new and totally new version like SQL Server for Linux. For example, they must confirm that the new version give us the same performance or better. So Microsoft Team had developed a monitor tool for internal use, and they have done it for their needs. But about 2 months ago, they released their internal monitoring tool in public for free. Installing the tool is not trivial, it is a bit complex, and it is out of the session of this scope session, but I highly recommend to check, especially if you need to monitor professionally a large number of servers. I added a link in the presentation so you can go and check it. And before we wrap up the meeting, I want to add several small tips and tweaks. Backup virtual machine. You can backup a virtual machine which already include your SQL server and prepare as many machines as you want. Backup your database. You can backup your database in Windows and restore it in Linux and vice versa. This is exactly the same file. You just need to transfer the backup file and you can restore it in the other operating system. And it's important to mention that even high availability is working, and you can create a network of high availability that one database is on Windows and another one is on Linux. So it's very important. Think about it. If there is a bug, for example, there is a virus that attacked all Windows machine, and all the Windows machine and your server is going down, it's not important because you have high availability with another database on Linux, and of course vice versa. So I really like this option.
So I have a small question here, Ronen.
Yeah.
So you mean to say there will not be. Okay, so the question might sound a little bit off, but being a hardcore Windows user, I am a little uncomfortable with Linux environment. But here, this changes a lot of it. This single session form view changes a lot of it. So there would not be any difference in terms of performance, or will there be any lag?
Oh, no. We didn't talk about performance. This is outside the scope of the presentation. I can talk about it because I did a lot of testing, but we are in the end of the time. So Please remember this question. I will answer it. I think that this is probably the most common question. People need to know why to move to Linux, but this is not in the scope of the lecture. Now we are talking about how simple it
Right, right.
is.
Sorry, I think I did not pose my question well also. Okay. So the another part would be there would not be a challenge in terms of, the connectivity, remaining intact when we have one database server in Linux environment and one database server on the Windows environment, right?
Yes, it is
Okay.
supported, and it's one of the case study that Microsoft mentioned in the documentation. The idea that if there is an issue with Linux, so you know that you have another backup on Windows and vice versa. Okay, so we need to wrap up. I think that I pretty much covered the topic. Microsoft SQL Server and Microsoft's tools are now supported on Linux. What next? Usually, at the end of each lecture, I invite the audience to my next lecture. Uh, I usually have a lecture once a month. I mean, open lecture for the community. In this case, my next event will be in Hebrew, so I will simply invite you to follow my Facebook page for more information, and I will publish the link to download this presentation right now online live together with you. Give me 1 second. I will open my Facebook and give you the link. So where is the browser? Let's go here. Oh, I have a lot of new messages. This is my page. This is all you need to know. Let's put the link. Let me quote Frankenstein. It's alive. You can go and download the presentation and walk through the installation step by step. I want to thank you for coming to the meeting, and I hope it was useful. Thank you, and I will see you next time. Manish, I will be happy to answer your question right now, and if there are more questions, I can stay for a bit longer. So about performance. This is a very big question. I can give you like a short version, a golden rule. According to my testing, it's going like this. Linux machine, and I'm talking not about something that you install on the desktop environment for a home user. If you are using a real Linux server like it was in the beginning, it has a lot less need for performance. The Windows operating system have a lot of overhead, so I found out that in small systems I get better performance using Linux. If I need to use Express, for example, the free version, or I have a very small databases, you might find out that using Linux will give you better performance. But when I move to a more complex environment and the system become more heavy, I found a small advantage in using Windows. I must say at this point that I'm more familiar with Windows, so there is a chance that if I will take someone who is expert in Linux, we will be able to prepare a machine that gives the same or maybe even better performance than Windows. But according to all my testing, when we are going to a more complex system, Windows give us a bit better performance. That's it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ronan. Thank you so much for such a wonderful session. And I myself personally feel that with this recording, I should be well equipped to at least take an attempt and try out the mixed environment for database in Windows as well as Linux. I mean, we will not have to worry about the fact that we will stop somewhere because of the setups or installation. So this should be pretty quick. I mean, we would really like to, come back to you and, share, how was our experience. That'll be awesome. That'll be simply great. And thank you to all the audience as well. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, and bye bye.